Hello again, and welcome back to our little studio. Lovely to have you here again. What on earth are we up to today? Well, we are going to make a basic broadcast template in Pro Tools. So here's the usual blank session. And first, we're going to go to our I/O setup and check that we've got all our little buses that are going to route our signals around our session. And I've set all these up already because I thought it'd be less tedious than watching me label everything. So, what have we got here? We've got dialogue bus, music bus, effects bus, Atmos bus. We've got a VO bus. We've got a music undipped bus because sometimes we need to provide a mix of the music where it hasn't been touched. This just allows international mixers to remix the music if they're not happy with the mix or they want to adjust the levels, and it just gives them a bit of freedom. Not that there would have been anything wrong with your mix whatsoever, but it's all about options, isn't it? Anyway, that's the way it's been for the last 500 years, so don't shoot the messenger. Anyway, moving on, we've got a music and effects bus, which is going to carry the music and effects. Then a DM&E bus, which is a dialogue music and effects bus. And a good old final mix bus. Then we've got a long and short reverb buses and a delay bus. And ignore anything below that, we're not going to be using it. In fact, I might blur it out. Yeah, there we go. Okay, let's OK that and let's make some sweet tracks. Okay, let's call up our trusty track menu and we're going to make 4 mono audio tracks for our dialogue. Then we're going to make 4 stereo effects tracks, 4 mono effects tracks, 4 stereo Atmos tracks, 4 mono Atmos tracks, 3 stereo music tracks, it's more than enough, and a mono music track because we always get sent shitty little mono bits of music that we have to deal with. Then we're going to have a voiceover track. Then we're going to have a stereo track. We're going to call this one Guide Audio. Why? Because we'll get given a guide audio track of our pre-mixed program, and it's just good to have it as a reference point, really. And in the same vein, I'm going to create a guide voiceover track. And this is for the guide voiceover that's been recorded in the edit suite, probably by the producer or a runner or something. And it's a good reference when you actually record the real voiceover and you can kind of match it up and see where it goes. Right, let's OK these bad boys. And I'm just going to get my little arrow sandwich between these 2 tracks here at the top. And then Shift Option and scrunch those babies up. And now we are going to create our groups. So these are all going to be stereo aux inputs. And these are where our groups of dialogue, effects and music, etc. are going to end up. So let's call the first one dialogue. And I'm going to fast forward this so you don't have to sit through my tedious typing. All right, finished typing. I'm back. So we've got a dialogue bus, we've got an effects bus, a music bus, Atmos bus, music undipped, M&E music and effects mix, DM&E dialogue music and effects mix, final mix bus, long reverb, short reverb, and delay. And these are all post fader. And that means whatever level you've mixed, say your dialogue, for example, that is going to be the overall level your group is going to receive. Now, our music undipped bus will be receiving our music group's audio pre-fade. So we're going to mix our music with our music group fader. But the music undipped will receive the music before we've started mixing it with the group fader. Capiche? Good. Right, so here are all our groups where our respective tracks are going to go to. So we've got a dialogue group, an effects group, a music group, an Atmos group, a DM&E group. So that's the dialogue, music and effects group. And then we've got a final mix group. And then we've got long reverb, short reverb, and delay effects returns here. The eagle-eyed amongst you will notice that there is no M&E group or music undipped group, but we are going to use those buses elsewhere in our session in just a bit. I'll come to that later. So let's do the routing for our groups first since we're here. Let's do the input for our dialogue group first. So we're going to want to receive all our dialogue tracks coming down the dialogue bus. So we'll click on the input, go to bus, route that to dialogue bus. And for effects, let's get the effects bus, then music, then Atmos, then dialogue, music and effects. And then our final mix bus here. Then for our effects returns, we're going to feed them with our long reverb bus, short reverb bus, and our delay bus. Right, and let's sort the outputs out. So our dialogue, effects, music, and Atmos, we want to go to our dialogue, music, and effects bus first. So we are going to shift-click on dialogue, effects, music, and Atmos, and then hold shift and Option down and click on our outputs. And then we're going to go to bus and then DME bus. And everything that's coming down these 4 groups will now go to the DME bus here. And then the output of the DME bus, we are going to click on the output, go to bus, and that's going to go to our final mix bus. And then our final mix is just going to go to the main output there. And then as for our effects returns, they are also going to go to the final mix bus. So again, Shift Option, click on output, and then just route those to the final mix bus for now. For a more advanced template, you can set up dialogue reverbs, effects reverbs, music reverbs, etc., etc. But this is just a basic template, so we're just going to have these going to the final mix bus for now. So let's shift-click on these groups and effects returns and just minimize those. Then we're going to go to our audio tracks and just get these a little bit larger. And let's just do the routing on these. So generally for our audio tracks, we're not going to need to adjust any inputs because there's going to be nothing coming into those. We're just interested in the outputs. So for the dialogue, I'm going to shift click on all our dialogue tracks, then Shift Option, click on the output, and let's route those to our dialogue bus. Effects, let's just select all our effects tracks. And then again, we're going to Shift Alt, click on our effects bus. They've all gone to the effects bus there. Atmos, again, let's send all these to the Atmos bus. And music, let's select those and send those to the music bus. And VO, oh, hang on, actually, I haven't done a VO bus, have I? Naughty. Right, let's remedy that straight away. So we're going to go 1 stereo aux input, and then let's call this VO. And that's going to sit with our buses there. So the input of that, we're going to set to VO bus. And then the output, we're going to send that to the final mix because we don't want that going to dialogue, music, and effects because it's not dialogue, music, and effects. It's voiceover, you see. Back to our voiceover track, I'm going to select the input now and we're going to go to my audio interface and select my 103 mic there. And then this is going to go to our voiceover bus. There we go. And then our guide audio and guide voiceover, we don't need to set any inputs there and they can just go to our main output or we can route it to the final mix bus. So next, let's just put some plugins on. I'm going to use stock plugins just so that you can have this template and you can kind of plug and play. So nothing too flash. And what we're going to do is we're going to put an EQ on our dialogue tracks first. So we're going to click on the first slot, go to plugin, EQ, and then just select our 7-band EQ here. And what I tend to do is I put a high pass filter on at kind of around 70 hertz or something because dialogue is generally a little bit boomy. So first of all, what you want to do is you want to just click on this where it says auto here. You want to click on this and make sure that your automation parameters are all enabled. So they should be on the right hand side there. If they're not, they'll be on the left. So let's just remove these and show you what to do if that is the case. If you just click on the top one, scroll down, shift click, and then that selects them all, and then you just click add. And then that means that they're all automation enabled. So when you start writing automation, it'll write automation for you. I've got it set up so when you put an EQ on the track, it's already automatically enabled. I think it defaults as being disabled. So if you go to setup, preferences, and I think it's in mixing, and in this automation bit, you just want to make sure that plugin controls default to auto enabled is checked there, and you should be golden. So anyway, let's just click the high pass filter in there, and then we're going to steepen the slope by twiddling this little knob up to 24 decibels per octave. So that's going to make that slope steeper, and we're just going to have it around 70 hertz. So you just drag that little bubble back and you can see it's just going to cut anything below 70 hertz. We're going to Alt drag and copy that to the rest of our dialogue tracks. Then for our effects tracks, we're going to click on the first slot, go to EQ again, and then select a 7-band EQ again. But we're not going to put a high pass filter on this one. We're just going to have it flat because, you know, we want boomy effects sometimes. So let me click on effects 2, and we're actually going to put a flat EQ on the rest of our tracks apart from the voiceover one. So we shift click on the rest of them. Then we're going to go shift option, click on our first slot and put in an EQ 7 on each of those. Oh, interesting that it didn't put it on these ones. Oh, because they're mono. Okay, fair enough. Right, so let's just remedy that. And maybe it's because I selected multi-channel and not multi-mono. Ugh, never mind. Okay, and for the VO, I am just going to put an EQ with a little bit of a high pass filter on it, just like the dialogue tracks, basically. So let's just do the same kind of thing. I know what you're thinking. I could have just copied the dialogue EQ down to this track, but I'm too lazy to scroll up. Anyway, that will get rid of any pops and rumbles and nasty things like that. Don't need anything on guide audio or guide voiceover. So let's sort out the plugins for our little groups and effects returns. So just going to make those bigger. So for the dialogue group, again, I just put an EQ on here, just in case we need to do a bit of overall EQing of the dialogue. Sort of like an overall dialogue mastering EQ, if you like. Then we're going to click on the second slot and put in a compressor. So we're going to reach for a Dyne 3 compressor limiter. I'm not reaching for the Pro compressor because I'm not sure whether you'll have it in whatever version of Pro Tools you're using. And I want to make sure everyone can play. Anyway, let's set this up for dialogue. So we're going to have a slow attack, slow release, so it's nice and punchy. Then let's set the threshold for around -16-ish. Ratio we can have around 3:1. And let's take the makeup gain up by about 4.5. Yeah. So these are kind of starting block settings, but as soon as the dialogue's in, you can start tweaking to your heart's content. I'm not going to go into the compressor controls in this video, but I think I do explain them in my audio drama template video. So you can have a look at that or one of the other 100 million compressor videos on YouTube. Yeah, anyway, I'm going to copy this compressor over to our voiceover group. Again, you can adjust it as soon as the voiceover is in. Then we're going to copy this to our effects group as well, but we're going to open up the threshold. We don't need to compress effects quite as much as dialogue and voiceover. And we're going to have a faster attack so that we can catch those peaks of those really loud effects nice and quickly. And we'll just adjust the release and just make that a bit quicker as well. Next, let's copy that to the music group. And I'm going to open the threshold up even more on this because we don't want to compress the music because composers get really grumpy if you do. Anyway, let's open up the attack and release on that and take the ratio down to about 2:1. We don't need one on the Atmos group because Atmos is generally very low in the mix. As for the dialogue music and effects group, I tend to put a limiter on this. So let's just go to multi-channel plugins, Avid, and Pro Limiters should be available to you if you've got Pro Tools Studio. And we're just going to take the ceiling down to around -3, 3.2, and take the threshold down to tighten up our mix a bit. Again, you can adjust these to your taste, and then I'll have the same limiter settings on my final mix bus here. And then we're going to put some meters on here. There's a free loudness meter by Julian here. So I'm going to put that on there after our limiter. So let's move down to our effects returns. And I'm going to click on the first slot of our long reverb and put in, let's go to our reverb menu, put in the stock reverb here, deverb. And then we're going to leave that on a whole large, and that's a large reverb, obviously. Then let's just copy that down to a short reverb. Click on that. And let's maybe have this room small. And again, you can fiddle around with these. And once we do some mixing tutorials, I'll go into all these little controls. Delay, let's go for the stock delay, which is, I think, mod delay 3. There we go. Just make sure link is clicked so that both the stereo parameters all follow the same thing. And then let's just have it around 200 for now. I use this for kind of sort of outside echoes and things like that. It's just good to have a little delay effect in your template, I think. So the next thing we need to do is sort out sending our signals to our effects returns and to our music undipped bus and our M&E bus and things like that. So let's just go up to our little menu here and we are going to click Sends A to E so that we can see our sends displayed here. And let's sort out our reverb and delay sends first. So I'm going to click on the dialogue 1 track. Let's shift click down to VO. So all our tracks, we want to make sure that we're going to be able to send those to our effects returns. So let's go shift option and click on the first send and we're going to go to bus and let's go to long reverb bus. So that sent everything to our long reverb bus, but you can see on this floating fader here that it's not actually sending anything yet because we need to write automation in to send it to the reverb bus, because we don't want everything going to the reverb bus and getting swamped in reverb when we haven't written any automation for it to do that. So makes sense really, doesn't it? Again, if we go Shift Option, click on the second send slot, we're going to send this to the short reverb bus, and then on the third, we are going to send this to the delay bus, and that's our effects returns. So let me just Shift Option, just hover between the tracks, make these a bit bigger because we're going to need another couple of sends here. So we need to set up our music and effects sends, our dialogue music and effects sends, and our music undipped send as well. First, let's set up our music and effects mix. So we need to send all our effects and music down an M&E bus to make our M&E stem. So I want to put the M&E bus on slot D of all my effects and music tracks. But obviously when I put something on a send, it's going to have no level, and I want it to be at 0 for all these tracks. But I don't want to just have to put 0 in every single one of these tracks. So I go to Setup, Preferences, in the Mixing tab. I'm going to put Sends Default to 0 dB. I'm going to check that just for this. So let me just take that off, and then I'm going to shift click on our effects, Atmos and music tracks, and then shift alt, and if I go to M&E bus here, there we go, they're all sending at 0 dB. So we'll get a nice post-fade M&E mix. And I'm just going to go to Setup, Preferences, and take that off because we don't always want it on, and okay that. Okay, next let's set up our music undipped mix. So for that we want to go to our music group, and we want to click on bus, go to music undipped, and we're going to set this to 0 dB, and then we're going to click this little pre button up here, which is the pre-fader button. So what we're going to do when we mix, we're going to use the group fader to do our music mix, get a basic kind of mix going with our music tracks, and then we're going to use the music group to do the actual music mix in our production. But a music undipped mix is sometimes required. So what we do is we'll set up this, and it'll mean any mixing you do with a music group will not affect the output of this. So it'll just be a flat mix of your music as it goes into the music group. So next, if you're working on a documentary and you've got your voiceover and your dialogue music and effects, which you're ducking underneath the voiceover, sometimes they want a dialogue music and effects undipped mix as well, so that they can replace the voiceover in a different language, for example. So we need to set up a pre-fade send on the dialogue music and effects group. And I'm not sure if I made a DME undipped bus in my IO. Let's have a look. I don't think I did. Naughty. So let's just remedy that and just take that up there. There we go. So again, let's just click on the send slot here, and we're going to send that to DME undipped. And again, we're going to go pre-fader, send that as 0. So when we're ducking our mix under our voiceover, all those level changes going up and down won't be affected when they leave here. So that's pretty much it, apart from our stem bounce tracks. I mean, I normally do offline bounces, but sometimes it's good to have some bounce tracks if you want to do a quick drop in and not bounce everything out again. Sometimes it can take a while to bounce if you've got loads of plugins, for example. So we're going to need dialogue, effects, music, voiceover, Atmos, DME undipped, music undipped. So what's that? 6, 7, 8. And a final mix, 9. Let's just do 9 audio tracks. So let's get our tracks. We're going to make 9 stereo audio tracks. So these are our bounce tracks. So we are going to mute them all. So we're going to shift click them and shift option mute, and disable the automation on these just in case we get any weird mute automation written in for some reason. Then I'm going to label them and fast forward and then explain to you what they are. Okay, so I've created these and I've added another couple of buses that I thought would be useful as well. So we've got dialogue bounce, a music bounce, effects bounce, voiceover bounce, music undipped bounce, dialogue music and effects bounce, dialogue music and effects undipped bounce. We've got an Atmos bounce, and we've got an effects and Atmos here as well. Because 9 times out of 10, people are going to want the effects and Atmos as one, effects stem. So that's why that's there. Also, I've created a voiceover mono and dialogue mono bounce track you can see down here at the bottom. And that's because some mixers internationally want a mono voiceover or dialogue stem so they can just remix it as they like. But let's concentrate on our effects and Atmos bus first. On our E slot here, I'm going to send that down the Effects and Atmos bus to our Effects and Atmos bounce track. So let's go up to Preferences and do our little sends default to 0 trick, because I want all these leaving at 0. So let's just go to bus, and there's our Effects and Atmos, and that's all being sent as 0. Lovely. Cool. I'm just going to turn that off again in case I get caught out by that later. And just an extra couple of things on our dialogue and voiceover group. Let's just move those up together and make those a little bit bigger. I'm going to send the dialogue down our new dialogue mono bus to our dialogue bounce track. And I'm going to send this at -6 dB because we're summing a stereo signal where the tracks are both the same into a mono signal here. So we need to compensate for that by taking down the level by 6 dB. And we're going to do the same, but for the voiceover mono stem. And again, we're going to take that down by 6 dB there. So let's just set the inputs of these bounce tracks. So dialogue is obviously going to be dialogue bus, and we've got music, then we've got effects, then we've got VO, and that'll be a stereo VO. Let's just make those a little bit bigger so you can see. Music undipped, we are going to obviously select music undipped. DME will be the DME bus. DME undipped is DME undipped bus. Atmos is going to be Atmos. Effects and Atmos, that's our new bus there. Final mix will be final mix. VO mono will be that. And dialogue mono is that. And if you want to do an offline bounce, you go to File, Bounce Mix, and you can bounce all your stems from here. Let's call these stems. Let's make them WAVs, and we're going to choose our mix source. I'm going to go to Bus, Dialogue Bus, then we hit the plus here, and you can bounce multiple stems. It comes up automatically with the next bus in the IO menu. So that's pretty much all our buses. DME undip, so we've got all of them there. We don't want the reverb bus. Let's change that to, we want our mono VO, and then we want a mono dialogue as well. So this will bounce out all our buses. So we just need to set the usual settings, interleaved, because it's bouncing a load of stereo tracks. I think we'll just bounce the monos as they are. And then you just set your session folder, and they will save as bounced files, and they'll all have the suffix dialogue, music effects, Atmos already when you bounce them. And then you just press bounce, and off they will go. So that's your basic broadcast template, and that's good for TV and radio stuff. And if you want to be a super organized, you can just make some folders. Let's go to our track menu and go to basic folder. We can make a dialogue one there. There we go. Let's just sling that up the top. And then you can just grab all your dialogue tracks by shift clicking and just plonk them in the folder. And you can close that up. And it's nice and neat. And you can do that for everything if you want. I find them a little bit faffy though, but it's up to you. If you want to be organized, nice. So that is it for now, and I'll be doing some tutorials on radio ads, TV ads, so I thought I'd do the broadcast template so you can follow along. You can grab this on my Patreon with a handy little PDF if you want. The link is below, or you can make it yourself. Cheaper, innit? Anyway, I will catch you in the next video. Don't forget, like and subscribe, and do the little bell thing as well. Thank you. Bye-bye.